Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hylian Gamescast. We have one of our friends, Tony from Hard for Games, who joined us on the last episode, but something that's right up his alley and something he's been covering on his own channel. All of the beta, Ocarina of Time, Zelda 64 details that's been coming out. So, Tony, with all of this information coming out and stuff, there's been, you mentioned that you had to put out a correction saying that you weren't the one who found this. You're just was helping, and then you covered it on your own channel. And I think that might be where some of the confusion is, because you were one of the first people, if not the first, to actually cover the specific details on YouTube.
Yeah, the individuals that released it and own the cart were gracious enough to keep me posted on everything as it was happening, so I got a real head start. As in, while they were finding things and while we were talking about whether or not, is this different, is that different, oh my goodness, look at this, like, what is this from, what's this texture, like, you know, we were in a group chat trying to figure out, like, okay, like, well, where is this from, oh no, that's retail, well, where is this from, whoa, I've never seen that before, that kind of stuff. I was, you know, like, basically, like, you know, they know who I am, and I contribute preservation-wise to this particular group. So, you know, I was saving the images, and I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to do this for a video, blah, 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 blah. So that's why I was able to kick something out, like, 30 minutes after. Because I was working on it all day up until that point. But, yeah, so I didn't dump the cartridge or anything like that. Basically, what happened, without revealing any names, is if you follow Forest of Illusion on Twitter, he releases a lot of it's kind of like Hidden Palace. It's just sort of like a different variation of that, except I know this gentleman personally and we're friends. But basically, he releases prototypes, betas, etc. So right before this happened, you know, the big one that had half the beta of Ocarina of Time, another Ocarina of Time one was released that was about 3 days early. And we knew about that one. We knew it was pretty close to retail. There's a couple of glitches, a couple of different things. It's kind of a disappointment. We were hoping that it would have been a little bit more. Then it was realized that there was this overdump on an F-Zero cart. So basically what that means is, you know, you have a cartridge, and just for the sake of a visual, let's say this is the cartridge, and this is the full size of Ocarina of Time. Well, this is the size of F-Zero. So F-Zero overwrote this much, but then there is this much still of Ocarina of Time. It was literally half. So half of Ocarina of Time, 1997 version of it, which was about a year and a half earlier, yearish earlier, was discovered. So what that meant was, unfortunately, all of the sound and music and the moment-to-moment story, like gameplay, was destroyed. Like the models and everything and how Link would progress through the game. The actual ability to play it was gone. But because the music files are so large, it functioned as a buffer with the data, which was actually a good thing, which meant that we got the script. So not how Link would interact, but what was said. All the textures, images, and every single location, which was absolutely huge. So basically what we're looking at here is half of a ROM, and every place Link went, everything that was said, every texture that was used is preserved. Combine that with the GigaLeak, where you have some areas and some source code and some alpha version enemies, plus the retail version. You can kind of piece together what this game would have been like, essentially, and that's why it's important. And that was kind of where I came into play, is basically just on the sidelines, and then release a couple videos. And I guess does that kind of answer your question there?
Yeah, and something else that I've seen some people confused about was the differences, because Ocarina of Time had such a weird development cycle where it was only on disc, and then it went to cartridge with disc expansion, and it ended up just being cartridge only. So it went through different versions, which we can kind of see that with the map and some of the screenshots that they put out back in the 90s, and then how the game actually turned out. But with this version, Ocarina of Time was delayed to 98, but it was originally supposed to release in 97.
I believe so, yeah.
So
it was definitely delayed by like a year or so.
And I was wondering if, one, to answer that question, do you think this, like they maybe thought they could have had the game done, and then this is just what they had, basically, because it's around that same time frame in 97, showing it for Space World, and it's supposed to release however many months later, and they have to delay it. And we've seen the way that a lot of these areas look, like Kakariko Village doesn't even look like a beta Kakariko Village. It looks like this is their first attempt at making a 3D village, so let's just do it as basic as we can, and then we'll build from there. So
yeah, I think that, partially because things got so delayed, you mentioned that it was supposed to be on the DD originally, and that was super early. Like, I think that was like 96, probably early 96-ish. I remember they were having issues putting all of Link's movements and the NPC movements and everything that needed to be happening simultaneously into the RAM, so you would like not stutter and have to read off of the disc. And it was causing all sorts of like animation issues, if what I remember regarding the interviews that they did regarding that is correct. But yeah, so I think that like many things that Nintendo does, they start with, aside from the DD, they start with the protagonist, the fighting mechanics, the animation, and like story, right? So based on a lot of the footage that was seen at that time and before that, you have a really well animated Link that can do a lot of different things. And you can go on horseback, and you have all of these weapons, and you can do all this different sword play. And I think they were focusing more so on fine-tuning the moment-to-moment combat. And then as the next progression, the dungeons, because the dungeons in this build are far more developed than the villages in the overworld. And then I think from there, they would have fine-tuned the villages. So I think that it was just sort of based on what I see and based on what Nintendo generally does in their development. I think that they probably thought they were further along than we think they are looking at it. It looks rudimentary when you take a look at Hyrule Field and the castle and Kakariko Village and such, but I think based on the development and how far along they were in the dungeons and Link's movements and stuff like that, I think it was a little bit further. But obviously, it wasn't far enough to not get delayed by an entire year, which is the Zelda way, right? It's always every Zelda game gets delayed. So, I mean, it just is what it is. But yeah, because I mean, there is a distinct difference between taking a look at the overworld villages and the dungeons. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Like, the quality is vastly superior in the dungeons and vastly inferior in the villages.
You can see kind of in those villages, very large and open, but not very detailed. And the dungeons, well, the dungeons are also, I feel like, larger in scale, but it's not missing that level of detail that we see in like the retail version of the game. Whereas Kakariko goes so bare bones and flat and like cookie cutter houses.
Super boring. Yeah. So they probably did that. They probably had all of their different NPCs running around, doing different things, and the story was implemented, and then the visuals were just sort of going to be like, okay, the next step, how do we brush this up and fix it up? And a lot of what they did was tighten it, and so that there's like 30 things to do in like a small little space. Like, you think of it like a Captain Toad treasure tracker, right? You have like a cube, and there's like a million or treasure hunter. What is it called? Yeah, Captain Toad
treasure tracker.
Treasure
something.
Yeah, whatever it is. That Captain guy, that Toad boy. There's like a million things to do in a small space versus like having to travel 30 miles that way to talk to the next NPC. They just tightened the hell out of it. Is basically what they did.
That's actually what they said they did with Skyward Sword, because people complained after Wind Waker how some people would make the joke they could just set their controller down with the analog stick pointing in one direction for like 10 minutes while they go and get a drink or something, and then come back and they're finally there. And then in Twilight Princess, it's really huge, but for the most part, it's kind of empty in the overworld. There's more stuff than previous games, but for as big as it is, it's not filled like some of the other games. So with Skyward Sword, instead of making a large area, which they could have done because it was on a larger disc than what the GameCube games were. So they could have had a lot more space and everything. But instead they decided to take the 3 main areas and put as much stuff in the area as possible. Instead of making it like a huge open space, it was like a medium-sized space, but it had a lot of stuff to do. And I think with this...
that this game benefited from that tightening, though, because even though you look at from back in the GigaLeaks with like that beta Kokiri Forest that came out, it was huge. It looked great.
Which Tony covered on the Hard for Games channel.
Yeah, but can you imagine booting that game up for the first time and just like having I don't know, it just feels so empty. And considering what you have to do in Kokiri Forest, like I would be bored with it. You know?
I mean, Kokiri Forest 2, at least, you know, the structures didn't look like these boring, like, late 1940s houses, but it was huge. So, like, I think it was kind of like a give and a take. Like, you know, if you had these giant areas, it'd be hard to traverse and find everything that you're supposed to do, and it would be kind of boring to go back and forth, which is also kind of why I theorized they gave you a horse, because I think they thought it was kind of a drag to move around so much. But, you know, but at the same time, you know, like if you had that large area and then you went out into Hyrule Field for the first time and you saw this big field, it'd just be like, okay, like another big space. But with the retail game, you're in this smaller space and then you go out into Hyrule Field and you're like, whoa, like the whole world like opens up. So like thematically and story progression wise, it works a lot better having Kokiri Forest small and the Hyrule Field very large. But at the same time, you know, it could have been kind of cool to have this like it just would have made the world much more vast to have all of these areas so big, you know, if they were properly populated, you know what I mean? Because it's like the Kokiri villagers were like this lost tribe of like pseudo fairy children things that no one knew about, but all you had to do was like walk 10 feet and you were in their village, you know what I mean? Whereas the GigaLeak version of it was like you crossed like 2 fields before you even got anywhere near the houses, you know what I mean? So it kind of made more sense story-wise being bigger, but gameplay-wise and experience-wise, I don't think it functioned as well.
So the question that I had, and this is my last question, then Daniel can ask his if he has any, and then we can get into covering what our favorite stuff from these details are. But with the areas being so large, Kokiri Forest we just talked about as an example, being shrunk down, I don't know when the revision that version of Ocarina of Time was that we seen in the GigaLeaks, but I had the thought that, to my way of explaining why it went from such massive areas to such smaller areas is partly from what you said. That way when you get to Hyrule Field or these other areas, it is such a big difference. Like when you go from Ordon Village to Hyrule Field and Twilight Princess, and you see this massive thing. But my thought was that with Ocarina of Time starting out on the disk drive and having like more than 10 times the amount of data that you would have on a cartridge, because I think they had 650 megabytes, right?
It would have been double. It would have been double the amount of space because they released it on a larger cartridge that was 256 megabytes, which is 32 megabits.
Okay.
The disc is like a zip disc. Functionally, it's like a magnetic disc. It would have been 64 megabytes. So it would have been double, not 10 times, but double is still a lot.
I was messing up the bytes and bits.
Yeah, that's all good. But you also have to keep in mind too that they like kind of increased, partially because of Ocarina of Time, the cartridge size. Like for the time, it was a very large cartridge size. Like normally games were like, you know, anywhere from 64 to 128 megabits, and at the time ish. And then Ocarina of Time comes out and like doubles that, basically. But then it would have been double again,
right?
If it was on disc. But yeah, that makes sense. I don't know how space and storage expensive those larger areas would have been. I'm not sure, but it could very well be. that they had to like tone it down because it was, you know, a cartridge game now, and it's different when you're working in like a development environment off of a hard drive that has infinite space comparatively, and then you have to like fit it onto a cartridge, you know.
Yeah, and the other thing I was saying, because I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I don't think I got around to actually saying it because I got on a tangent on the different versions of Ocarina of Time that was in development. Because there's like the A-B one where it was just A and B, and then there's ones where it's like a diamond pattern with the C buttons, and then it's finally the layout that we have for Ocarina of Time. And you can kind of tell from those screenshots where in the time period that version of Ocarina of Time would have been. But I've seen some people calling this an Ura Zelda leak. And this isn't from any of that. It would be more just that is Zelda 64.
That is absolutely false on multiple levels. First off, it's not a leak. No one hacked Nintendo servers. It didn't leak out of Nintendo in the traditional way. I mean, it was on a development cart, and it was dumped, and then it got released. So, I mean, maybe you could call that a leak, but I mean, it's not. Like when I think of like a Giga leak or like a leak, I think of like the Giga leak, which is more nefarious in a way where it's like someone like actively was like hacking into their like servers and stuff, which is, I mean, great for the preservation community, but obviously Nintendo frowns on it. Yeah. But and it's not Ura Zelda at all. I mean, it has nothing to do with the expansion. This is the core game that we're dealing with here, and you know, the Giga Leak kind of revealed a little bit more so what Ura was, and there were always two thoughts on Ura, and I like to call them the Luigi Blood thought and the Tony thought. So
I like this name.
I was always of the opinion that it was going to be something more grandiose, something different stories, you know, different items, whatever. And that was based on interviews that I read or thought I read when I was younger. And Luigi Blood had looked at the code and was like, there's only code to change around the dungeons, therefore it is Master Quest. So his was much more logic based, and mine was much more, but I read from the developers, but you got to keep in mind the developers, it could have been mistranslated, it could have been, you know, my memory's off, you know, whatever it could be. But as it turns out, it was kind of somewhere in the middle, but leaning more towards him. So basically, based on the Giga Leak, what Ura Zelda was an expansion that rearranged the dungeons and or gave you sort of a like mini dungeon experience to get to the bosses. So there was some additional content other than rearranged dungeons, but it was minimal.
Yeah, there was an interview.
Those, mini dungeon. Oh, sorry, Jesse.
Oh no, you can go.
At the same time. But with those mini dungeon experiences, I think I remember what this might be in the Giga Leak, but are you referring to that section where it looks like it's like maybe 2 hallways out of the dungeon and then just the boss room? And I think some people were speculating that it was like maybe a boss rush mode, which we got in the 3DS version. But...
Exactly, which they ultimately recycled and reused, right? So it is definitely, I mean, I think the term Ura Zelda gets tossed around a lot. And to be 100% frank, that's probably partially my fault because, you know, people would make Ura Zelda recreation projects and I'd feature them. So a lot of things got Ura Zelda, Ura Zelda, Ura Zelda recreation, Ura Zelda this, or Ura Zelda that. And it's not, you know, it's other people too, obviously, but it kind of became popular. Like the idea of it became popular. But functionally, what it was supposed to be was an expansion. And obviously, Ura just means like another version or variant, you know, of it. But as far as it being like an Ura Zelda leak, like it's just not what it is. It is a dump of half of a ROM of a Space World 97 era build of Ocarina of Time.
All right.
Not to sound negative or to squash whoever said that, but it just isn't what it is.
It's good to have the factual information to clear up any misinformation or confusion. But Daniel, do you have any questions about it before we talk about?
Not about that, but actually to sidestep for a sec, we got a super chat.
Oh, okay.
Here that we got to acknowledge from our friend Hylian Luke. He donated $10. He said, so something I am stoked about from this 97 build's discovery is that we finally know about the Medallion Spells, what they were originally going to be. Do we know what all the different elemental arrows were, though?
That's
So if
actually
we've seen
what.
more different arrows, but
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to be talking about.
Oh,
for
perfect.
my topic.
There we go.
So we'll try to answer that. And there is text that you can go through from the ROM, or I don't even know what to call it. Would you call it a ROM or half a ROM?
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, yeah, it's a half of a ROM. I mean, you could call it that for sure.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of text and stuff that goes over how the story slightly changed, and of course it does this again.
Just ducking the hell out.
Again.
Right when it gets spicy.
So yeah, so there's details and information in a lot of the text. Like when you pick up an item and it says what it is and tells you the text, there is a bunch of text like that in the ROM as well. And Daniel's going to be talking about some of that, and it's kind of a mystery what Tony's going to be talking about, but I guess we can go ahead and get started with that. We're at... Yeah,
I was just reading some of the comments. Melon Speedruns mentions that the 64DD had more RAM than the N64. I believe a lot of that RAM was utilized to actually run, like the actual disc itself. Like I don't correct me if I'm wrong on that. Like I remember hearing that the additional RAM, because you have the RAM expansion. Like I don't think that would have necessarily helped in the same way that like it helped Majora's Mask, for example.
So I was reading...
correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, so I was reading a few interviews earlier with Miyamoto and Aonuma about Ura Zelda and Zelda 64, Ocarina of Time, the various versions of the game, and then Majora's Mask. And they said that the mechanic of all of the NPCs having their own schedule and moving around and stuff, that was the main reason that they needed the RAM expansion to play Majora's Mask, to set up that whole time schedule with all the characters for the Nintendo 64 to be able to remember where someone's at one specific time, because it's not like a time comes and they just pop up right there. They have to move to that place.
I am not the best hardware specialist, to be honest with you, so take what I say with a grain of salt, but I do remember there being an interview with the developer saying that they were having issues with the animation of Link and getting people to move around properly, animate properly in the DD version of Zelda. And maybe it's just because it wasn't optimized, but despite the fact that it had that additional 4 megabyte RAM expansion, so I think I don't know if it was a RAM issue. I think it may have been more of a space issue, is what my gut's telling me, but I could be wrong, because again, I'm just kind of speculating. So grain of salt, but
and there's 1,000 different interviews that contradict each other about Ura Zelda and all that, because there's ones where he says, "Oh, Ura Zelda was Master Quest," and then I sent Daniel a link earlier to where Miyamoto says with Ura Zelda that it's going to be coming out, and in order to play it, you have to have beaten Ocarina of Time. And then it'll take you to a new world with new items and everything. And like that was the direct quote, that you have to beat Ocarina of Time, and then it takes you to a new world. So there's a lot of contradicting statements that they've made. And I think it just goes back and forth on how it evolved. I don't necessarily think at any point they were just lying to get people to buy Master Quest. I think it truly turned into Master Quest. And any of the extra stuff could have been used in Majora's Mask. But...
I mean, you also see a lot of stuff too in this half of a ROM, and then we have my buddies Mario Nova 64 and Melon Speedruns in the comments here saying, well, yeah, it's still a ROM. Well, it's half a ROM. Well, yeah, it is the read-only memory of this particular cartridge. It is a ROM, but it's not a ROM in the way that you'd think of a ROM, where it's like, I'm going to download a ROM. Well, you can't play it, but yes, of course it is. Of course it is ROM. But it's just half of one. Half of what we would assume as being like the full game / ROM. If you were to say ROM equals game, it's half, right? Yeah. But of course it.
Wait, did your mic cut out, Tony?
Yeah, I think we lost your sound there, Tony.
Here's my sound. Okay.
Oh, it came back.
It's going in and out.
All
right.
Okay.
So
hold on a second.
So
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
That's better.
All right.
Guys, are you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Just a bit of like static came through for a sec, but
it seems good now. So before we run out of time, Tony, on your channel, Hard for Games, you've covered a lot of stuff from the Giga Leak and then this beta dump of half a ROM of Zelda 64. So what have you covered from it? And if you want to say, what can people look forward to seeing in one of your next videos covering it, if you haven't already? And then you can tell us about what your specific favorite thing or...
Sure. Yeah, I've covered a lot of the maps and the items. I have a video coming out probably tomorrow that does Hyrule Field, which is very different. Like Hylia, an archery range, and what was that other place? Oh yeah, well, like one of the Goron mines. It's like super weird. I don't know if you've played around with it, but it's
is it the hookshot puzzle?
No, it's a labyrinth of caves. It's super confusing to navigate. It's very difficult to even know what the hell's happening. But yeah, so that's what I'm going to be releasing tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, like a lot of the stuff right now is available. I know that 𝐓𝐬𝐤 is working on a ROM where he's like reincorporating actors, like the actual NPCs and enemies, into the spaces, which is going to be awesome. The ones I'm playing right now is from Z64Me.
Right, sorry to interrupt, but your mic is, there's like a wall of static over your...
Huh. Here, let me unplug and replug here.
Sure.
Is this any better?
Yes.
Yes, no?
Miles better, yeah.
Okay, I don't know. I think maybe something was getting loose there. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I mean, realistically, I'm going to showcase a little bit more of it, and then probably at that point, everyone will have seen everything there is to see. So I'm going to have a video tomorrow. But I just want to say that there's some really talented people working on this that are far more talented than me. So you should check them out as well. So, obviously there are a number of people that wanted to remain anonymous that got all the maps out of the ROM and discovered it and dumped it and did far more work on it that, again, they want to remain anonymous, but I just wanted to, if they're watching, I wanted to thank them for everything that they've done, because it's really been like a dream come true to actually go through this, and it's been a dream for many people as well. So they've really made a lot of people happy by doing this. But I also want to give a shout out to, like I mentioned, 𝐓𝐬𝐤, who's working on a ROM that reincorporates the actors, and Z64Me, who already has a ROM available that you can play through these maps. So, I'm going to be releasing videos, but if you want to actually check it out for yourselves and like feel like you're playing an earlier version, check out Z64Me's channel, because you could just do that tonight and check that out. And it's just, he put a lot of work into it, and he does really good work. So I know you asked more about me, but I kind of wanted to throw some other people some credit, because they worked a lot harder.
Without them, we wouldn't have it. So
yeah,
that's true. And he has a criminally under, like, a low sub count. Z64Me is like 3.3 thousand.
Yeah, go give him a sub, guys.
Legendary stuff that he's doing, right? Like,
yeah. And I spoke to him earlier this morning for the first time ever to get permission to use some of the video clips that he's uploaded, and he was a really really nice guy. First time ever talking to him. He was really awesome.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, he's a really really cool guy, and very generous, and just does really really good work. So I mean, check, if when you guys are done watching this today, check out his channel, because he also like reanimated a lot of the alpha enemies from the Giga Leak, and they are ridiculous. So check them out for sure.
All right, and did you have a favorite thing overall from this, or something?
I don't think I had a specific favorite thing, but you could ask my wife. Like, I was shaking with excitement, and I was so freaking excited about this. Like, I was like, I am okay. So not to condone drinking, but I was like, it was the middle of the day, and I'm like, I need a beer. Like, I need to like calm my ass down because I was just like so excited, like and like giddy with just about everything. It was just there wasn't a specific thing. It was just the whole event. It was like Christmas Day for me. It's like, well, what was your favorite part about Christmas? I don't know, like everything, you know.
I remember that morning. Sorry.
What's that? Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I remember that morning when all of it got announced. I asked you. No, I sent you the link of the 3 days before Ocarina of Time, like whatever version that was, and you already knew about it, and you had a video go up either that day or the next day. But then, like 10 minutes later, you messaged me and was like, "Oh, something big might be coming." And you were saying that you were all shaky from excitement and that. And then
oh my god,
we just had no idea exactly what it was. I thought maybe that someone did find like some unused stuff in that 3 day before release ROM, but yeah, it turned out to be a lot more. And I remember the first time I had you on the channel a long time ago, before Daniel and I even had this podcast. I was asking you about your channel and all the stuff you do on there, because you do a lot of beta questing and restoration and preservation and everything, and asked you what you personally felt like the holy grail for canceled or unreleased beta stuff would be. And you said Zelda 64 or Zelda Ura. Like if something from that came out, that would be like the one thing that everyone would want. So
yeah, I mean, you know, it's been on my wish list for a while, and like now we have a large chunk of it. So it's just I was just very happy to be involved, to be honest with you. It was even in like a minor capacity, just kind of covering it. So like I said, it's been just super freaking exciting. But I guess to answer your question, if there's one like particular thing like that was super exciting for me, like just in terms of like to point people in the right direction, you know, some of the maps in particular, like Hyrule Field, are really telling to how the game would have been structured and look like. The early Hyrule Field is very bizarre. It's very strange. The geometry of some of the cliffs and stuff are odd. The colors are almost pastel, like they're very muted. So there's a lot of very interesting hints, even just within that map, that kind of give you a feel for how the game would have felt in general.
So
that map in particular is really cool, because if you look at sort of I was like exploding with excitement talking to Jesse about this earlier.
Yeah.
Like even if you just take an overhead look of Hyrule Field, like the overall general vague layout is almost exactly the same as the final game. So you can see they kind of had an idea in mind of, okay, well, we're gonna have the castle to the north, this paths of forest and the river going out, and this bridge over the river and then up to Kakariko. And you can see the idea was there, but it's still like a completely different map. Really, the geometry is completely different. The textures are all different. It's like stepping into like a parallel dimension, and or some kind of weird fan project or alternate universe.
Yeah, it's like just looking into a distorted like funhouse mirror. Like you can see the reflection in there, but it's not the same image. You know what I mean? Like it's very strange, and yeah, you could definitely see where everything was kind of going, but there's just so many oddities. Like you can scale most of the mountains in the early Hyrule Field. Like you can, like, so long as it's not like 90 degrees, you can walk up it. Like steep, like areas that you could never go up in regular Ocarina of Time, you can just climb. You know, it's very interesting. There's the lone house that's just in the middle of the field with a garden, which I'm like, is that like an early Landmine ranch? Like, what is this? You know,
I had the same speculation.
Yeah, you know, like, is this, especially since it was near you know, Kokiri Forest, you know, because it was like, do you just walk out and suddenly you get a horse, because the developers were like, this is a drag to walk through, like, here you go, you know, like what was the point of it? So it just kind of gets your mind really going, especially since we only have half the ROM and we can't actually play it. So
yeah,
and there's that one area with that texture that looks almost like a tombstone, but it's right on the west version of the Castle Town wall there. And then I was thinking about it, and I said to Jesse earlier, I was like, there's that section in the final version of the game, in the retail release, and that section of the map always bothered me because there's very little to actually do there. It's like this big wide open area with nothing there, and like maybe,
just a single poo.
Yeah, like a big Poe is there, I think, and that's it. And then maybe at that time there was something important to do, and as things evolved, it just never got really dealt with. And you know, there's so much just potential is the big thing.
Yeah. Come to think of it, that area always confused, and I don't know if it bothered me, but it definitely confused me, where it's like, there's got to be something here. There's got to be something here. And I think there's might have been like a hole you could bomb, or like the Poe, like you mentioned. But it felt like I never put two and two together until you just said that. But it felt like there should have been something there. And then you see that texture, which, disclaimer, I put that on Twitter, and some people warned me, like, hey, maybe that was placeholder. Hey, maybe the texture's loading wrong. Like, hey, like, don't look too far into it. But still, if there was something there, that would explain this area that functionally has no use in the retail version of the game, that is kind of just like a leftover. You know, it's like an appendix of the game, or like a tailbone of the game. You know what I mean? Like, it's there because of evolutionary reasons, but functionally you can live without it.
I felt the same way with the forested area between Kokiri Forest and Lake Hylia. I think there's a big Poe in that area as well, but there's just like a bunch of trees. And on the map for this version of Zelda 64, Kokiri Forest like consumes all of that area, and then like as soon as Kokiri Forest stops, Lake Hylia begins. But that was a question about Hyrule Field that I was going to ask you. Is on the Z64Me's channel, there was 2 versions of Hyrule Field, and I know there was the GigaLeaks version of Kokiri Forest, and then there's this beta version of Kokiri Forest that we got this time, and both of them are completely different to the final retail version of Kokiri Forest. So was I mistaken with 2 different versions of Hyrule Field being included with this, or was one just like...
No, there were 2 different versions. Okay. One was super early, and then the other one was more reminiscent of what we know. So like the newer one had colors that were less like muted and less pastelish. They were more similar or even the same if I were to compare them. I didn't compare them one-to-one to the retail version in terms of like screenshots, but it looked more like the colors of the final version. The landscape looked more like the final version, and it was more or less final, but they were like gates and like horse jump stuff everywhere. And so like it was specifically blocking areas off. Like you couldn't go into certain villages. It felt like maybe an area of the map for like a race or some event that was supposed to happen in that area, where that action within the game itself needed to take place in an isolated area where you could not leave, whether that be a race or a battle or something like that. But everything was blocked off. But aside from that, it looked functionally the same as the retail version.
All right. I could go on talking to you about this all night, Tony, but to hurry up and get through this, Daniel, do you have yours?
My what?
The thing you liked from this.
Oh yes. So I mean, the maps obviously are like super cool. But what I've spent almost all day digging through today was a lot of the text, which is in this sort of, I found this file with just a dump of just text, and it's all of the text for like labels for items and maps, and the text that shows up when you enter a dungeon, for example, it shows on the screen, or just the dialogue text. And of course I don't speak Japanese, so I was just like copy pasting everything into Google Translate. So for sure like the grammar and stuff is wrong, but like there's some really neat stuff. And like Luke mentioned in the chat before, you know, that we got to see sort of what these cut functions were. So things like the Sun Song, there's no mention of learning it in this, but you instead would have been able to sleep at inns and hotels in this version game, not unlike Breath of the Wild actually.
And Majora's Mask.
And Majora's Mask, there's the inn, but you don't go to the inn to pass time in Majora's Mask.
No.
but in this game, like you have like there's the dialogue options of like when do you want us to wake you up, that kind of stuff, right? So if say you got to and Ingo was the innkeeper instead of working at the ranch in this version. So like just these little changes like that, and then like Luke mentioned, the medallions. There's sort of that text of like you found this item. And the medallions all, rather than just saying, oh, this sage adds their power to yours, and it meaning nothing. It's a complete MacGuffin in the final game. Here, they actually seem to describe purposes or be usable items, like this fire magic that you do, or the wind medallion it describes using a warp spell, which sounds like Furor's Wind in the final game. And yeah, so like all of these really cool sort of cut features, which we had hints of in screenshots of, early screenshots where they have a medallion equipped, but never knew what they were actually for. But one of the ones that I thought were really cool, because we basically got the fire and the ice one, or with like ice arrows and stuff. There's one that's like a soul medal, which I assume is the spirit medallion. Lets you become Navi and fly around, is the in-game description. The Medal of Darkness makes enemies not notice you, and the Medal of Light illuminates everything. So just these really cool features. I don't know if illuminating things is necessary in anywhere in the game, but maybe they would have had puzzles around it. But
yeah, or it could have been another version of the Lens of Truth.
That maybe. This is real speculation, okay?
All right, tinfoil hats, guys.
But Zelda Ocarina of Time is a dark game. Like, visually. It's darker than other N64 titles. Like, you go into some of these dungeons, especially like in the footage I captured recently of the beta version, the 97 version, and I had to bump up the brightness in Premiere Pro in the editor so like it would be visible.
Oh,
YouTube.
you meant
like it's
literally
the
dark.
Brightness.
Yeah.
Yes, literally dark. And I remember because the textures tend to be more intricate than say like a Mario 64, like muddy, a Mario 64 that's like a little bit more crisp and simple. Like so things get lost a little bit more. I remember playing as a kid, and of course you have a CRT, and I remember like because my like if it was too like if the atmospheric conditions were not right in the room, like you couldn't see Zelda. I remember like the light coming in a certain way, like hitting the TV and causing a slight reflection on the glass, and you being unable to see the game. Like you had to play at night and like bump the brightness up, or I had to like create like shade over the TV so I could see it. So Zelda, like the actual game, is truly a lot darker brightness and contrast wise than a lot of other titles. So maybe they were going to originally do some sort of spell that lightened areas. I don't know, possibly. Or maybe they were going to have some areas that were even darker than actually appeared. But it is a really dark game. Like the only game that's darker than this on the N64 is Doom 64, and I think that was an accident.
Fair, yeah.
I actually remember one of the interviews that I read earlier kind of goes along with this. It wasn't Aonuma or Miyamoto. It was one of the other directors. I think what was his name, Daniel? Tezuka? Yeah, Tezuka. He mentioned, they asked him from a technical standpoint what was one of his favorite things about the Ocarina of Time. And oddly enough, it wasn't like a certain boss fight or dungeon mechanic or anything. What he mentioned was having an in-game option for you to pause the game if it gets too dark to adjust the brightness in the game menu.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that's really interesting that you brought that up, because when I read that earlier, I was like, really? That's it? Not riding a horse? Not the fishing minigame? Not the giant boss fights? Turning the brightness up? So that actually could be something that you're thinking of there.
I mean, it was a real dark game, and also like that, like they had a spell to turn you into Navi, which was basically just like, how can we use the debug camera? Like, how can we?
I feel like there's a lot of the natural boundaries of the game that they probably removed it because I know the first thing I would have done is try to fly like all the way out of bounds of like, field just to see what's over there, right?
It probably got too complicated with like just kind of revealing the seams of the game, but they kind of had an element like that in Skyward Sword. We could like become that beetle thing.
Oh yeah,
I can't remember what it's called,
and,
where like you fly around.
Also, Wind Waker, you use the 𝐼𝐬 pair. And And Zelda 2, of course, actually, there's a fairy spell that does exactly that as well. It turns you into a fairy.
Okay. Well, maybe it's more so inspired by that than by Zelda 2. But yeah, I mean, they took the idea and they ran with it in other titles.
So, Daniel, you will be covering a lot of this in a video you're working on now for tomorrow or the next day.
Coming up.
So, what is another thing, really quick?
Okay, I'll just rapid fire like a couple neat things. One thing, and I'm glad they changed this. You would have needed 8 heart pieces instead of 4 to get a new heart container. That just sounds like, for lack of better words, straight BS to me. But so I'm glad they changed that.
Even the 5 in Twilight Princess was odd. Yeah,
exactly. There is text that when, like, some of the song titles, like the Warp songs, are different. So, like the Serenade of Waters, the Waltz of Water, for example. But the text, when Link learns it, it all displays as I remembered the wind minuet instead of I learned the minuet of forest, that kind of thing. They all specify remembered, and I'm not sure what or why that implies in the story, but about Link, there's the landmines, which I think we also talked about in DMs a little bit, but there's that sort of...
I thought it would have been...
that Koopa shell, the Mario Kart blue shell.
Yeah. And I told Tony I thought it would have been like a targeting version of the Bomb Chew, because that's what that shell does in Mario Kart. But then he corrected me and said that it was a landmine. I was like, what? Zelda had a landmine?
Yeah. Part of the issue with having that, because I had that items video like before anything was translated, and I was just like, what is this thing? Like, it looks like a blue shell, but it kind of like joking, like, yeah, it kind of looks like, I didn't think it was a blue shell, but like, I'm like, what is it? Like, what the heck? You know, like, it just kind of looks like this weird thing. And then these translations came out and they're like, oh, it's a landmine. So it's kind of like it's like a non-moving bomb chip, right? So, you know, so it's kind of like a blue shell, but it just, I mean, it explodes, but it's not, you know.
Yeah.
Do you think it would have been the same kind of mechanic as the powder keg, to where it's like this big explosive item, but you just set it down and then it blows up by itself?
I think probably an enemy would have to walk over it if it's truly like a landmine, if it was translated correctly.
That's true.
So you'd set them up. You'd set them up. Well, no, other people translated it as landmine as well. So I mean, it's possible that maybe you set them down in an area that was heavily populated. You know, like maybe like an enemy has like a back and forth.
Yeah.
You know, and then you set the landmine, run away, and then you know it blows up as it goes through its normal like walking routine.
That's pretty cool.
That makes sense.
Daniel.
Right. You can eat a chicken egg. I don't know why this. It's not an important detail, but there's just this line that's like, you know, when you eat it, you feel like a snake, and it's just like there's this sort of jovial sort of humor about all of the dialogue, and also worth noting, a lot of it is narrated almost like first person, like it's Link saying like, "Oh, I found this thing," and instead of being like, "You got the thing from the game to you," which is really neat.
That's what they
did. First person instead of second person,
And Breath of the Wild, the Japanese version of the game, has the Hyrule Compendium. Instead of giving like an encyclopedia or dictionary of all the stuff you take pictures of, in the Japanese version, it's written as if Link is using it as his actual journal.
A journal and,
yeah. So everything's in the first person with that as well.
And there's also just a lot of like dialogue changes. So like the Deku Tree, just some of his dialogue to Link, for example, is different. There's like a fairy curse that it mentions instead of, Ganondorf giving him a curse, but that's Goma. You would have had to save Navi from inside the Deku Tree, according to this text here, which means you didn't start the game off with her. And even just some other things, a lot of the dialogue. Zelda doesn't know how to open the Door of Time when you first talk to her. She tells you she has to find out. She's going to look in the Royal Library to find out how to do it while you go off collecting, spiritual stones. And yeah, so there's just tons of if anyone is able to, I could even probably post it on Twitter, but the translations are really neat. See, a lot of it's the same. Like, there's the creation myth that the Deku Tree tells you about the goddesses and stuff, and that's like almost the exact same. And there's just tons of stuff that's totally different or is the same, but there's extra like coverage for it. Like Lon Lon Ranch, for example, something that's speculated but never said in the final version of the game, but is in this text, is the name of the ranch comes from the owners, Malon and Talon. It's Lon Lon Ranch because Malon and Talon. And that's something we kind of all assumed, I think, but it was never said in the game, but is in this build of the game. You also would have been able to name Epona, which came back in Twilight Princess. So even though it's something we never saw, there's at least text that gives you the option here in this big dump of text. So there's more that I'm going to be covering in that video on Jesse's channel really soon when I'm done working through all this stuff. But it's really cool. Yeah, that's. I won't spoil anything too much for when that video comes, because then no one watching this will watch that one though. So.
I do think from the text that you sent over, it was interesting that it referred to any fairies that you got or utilized as fairy souls, which kind of gave a little bit more gravity and sort of almost a little bit more macabre in terms of utilizing them, because it's like, I'm going to, instead of like, oh well, we kind of always assumes like you use a fairy and that fairy brings you back to life, but like in this, it seems a little bit more like I'm absorbing your life energy.
Yeah.
And I'm absorbing your soul, and your soul will bring me back, and that's your purpose. And now you've dissipated. That's, you know what I mean? Like that.
You remember this is for kids, right?
Yeah. And it kind of almost reminds me of, I don't know if it was just a lucky guess or what, but the missing link mod where that's supposed to take place between Ocarina and Majora's Mask.
Right.
Part of the lore in that is that it's supposed to lead up to Majora's Mask, so Link is looking for Navi, and you come across a library and it's talking about like, well, what happens to fairies after they've been used up for their purpose? What is if they have a purpose and then they've done it, do they just disappear? Like it almost kind of makes you think of them more as beings and less like.
Sorry, guys.
So yeah, because like you have the fairies that rejuvenate your health, but then you also have Navi, who's more like sentient. So it's like, but it's kind of like put a little bit more gravity towards them. And it seems like the early dialogue or the early text also did that as well. So
yeah, what's funny is that's something I always thought of as a kid. I just remember like one of those random child thoughts that I remember as a kid playing this game and thinking like, does Navi think it's weird that we stick another fairy in the bottle? Does she get weirded out by that?
Yeah. It's bizarre.
It's totally weird. Yeah. Another just like weird tidbit, I guess another spoiler is a lot of the dialogue with Gorons, when you're talking to Goron characters, they use that term Goro like throughout their own dialogue, which they don't in Ocarina of Time, but in other Zelda games they do. There's a lot of Gorons that say like Goro like intermittently, including even Yunobo in Breath of the Wild, so as recent as that. But it was, I guess, cut from this game, but is here in this earlier version. So it's I don't know, it's just like a weird detail that I guess is one of those ideas they held on to and re-implemented later. But yeah.
All right, is that everything that you're wanting to mention?
For now, I guess.
All right, because I have a couple of things. One, and it might be a spoiler for your video, but I mentioned it in the video that I made earlier. But for a long time, there's a lot of people theorizing or speculating on who exactly is that statue at the Spirit Temple.
Oh, yes. And this is in...
There is in-game text that clarifies who it is.
Yeah, this is one of the big thing is in the retail version of Ocarina of Time. It's just like the sand goddess, and they call it the Desert Colossus, is the big statue.
Yeah, and I think in the Japanese text, they call it like there's a Japanese symbol for evil next to it as well, which is odd. But you don't.
It's just like one word different, because instead of just being the evil goddess statue, it specifies in this version the evil goddess statue, Din,
Yeah.
who was one of the 3 golden goddesses. And I'm not sure why Din is implied to be evil here, because in none of the other games or anything else is that ever implied. But it's like, from a lore standpoint, I know there's probably 100 Zelda theorists out there who like that blew their minds, I'm sure, because we've always speculated what, like, is this a separate goddess? Is this the Gerudo's interpretation of one of the other goddesses that we already know about? Is this like just a cultural difference or something else? But I guess the original intent was, this was the goddess of power, Din. That's their Gerudo's, I guess, their interpretation of Din. In this version of the game, at least. And then they cut it out.
Lore-wise, I thought it fit really well because you have the Gerudo, who their characteristics are their red hair, and Din is always associated with the color red. And then you have the Deku Tree's line saying that she created the red earth or whatever, which you could possibly take as the desert because the color of the sand and the mountains and everything. And then she's the goddess of power, and the Gerudo King is the one who gets chosen by the Triforce of power. So there's a lot of little connections there that they could have put, and then at the last minute decided to take it out and leave it just another mystery or something. And then even the Oracle Din, who's based off of the goddess Din that gets introduced in the Oracle games, looks a lot like Gerudo as well, with the gold bracelets and the same color and type of outfit that Nabooru wears. And the other thing is in the item screen, you see the spiritual stones. And for the longest time, we've seen the ocarina with like the red, blue, and green stones in it. And people speculated maybe this is what you do with it, but we didn't really know for sure. But apparently, whenever in this version of the game, whenever they put the Triforce in the Sacred Realm and they closed the door of time to get there, they made the Master Sword the key to get to the Sacred Realm. But to open the door of time, they created these 3 different stones or whatever. It reminds me of the Infinity Stones because you gotta go around collecting them all from like different people. But
you are Thanos now.
Yeah, so apparently the goddess gifted Zelda to take care of, and not Zelda, but Zelda's ancestors to take care of and protect the ocarina, which seems to be not the Ocarina of Time, but the fairy ocarina. And then the Kokiri stone was gifted to the Deku Tree and the Kokiri, and the Goron stone was gifted, or the Goron Ruby was gifted to the Gorons, and the same with the Zoras. And once you get all 3 of those pieces and the Ocarina of Time, and you combine them, then it turns into the Ocarina of Time, and you can open the Door of Time to get the Master Sword. And it mentions that Zelda isn't having these visions or dreams. In the text, it says that the goddess Nehru is speaking to Zelda. So,
right, rather than her having sort of her own premonitions that she has in what she describes it in like the final game is she's having these dreams. But in this build, she talks about Nehru speaking to her.
Yeah.
Also, to derail things, Jesse. Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
It reminded me, one thing I wanted to talk about is something I found digging through all this text is I think a big change in the structure of the adult portion of the game, actually. And basically, in the final version of the game, as we know, when you pull the Master Sword, you're sealed for 7 years, you come out, Sheik stands in the way of the pedestal for a while so that you can't actually put it back until you finish, I think, the first temple, the Forest Temple. But in this version of the game, what seems to have happened is after you would land out of the Sacred Realm as adult Link, the Door of Time would close, actually, and you wouldn't be able to access that room. And the spiritual stones would be there, but they'd be sort of no longer colored in. They'd sort of lack their shine. And you would have to reactivate those at the Fire and Forest and Water temples to be able to reopen the Door of Time just in time for the Shadow and Spirit Temple, where you need to do a portion of those as young Link. But basically, you would have been forced to stay as adult Link for a lot longer in that portion of the game, as opposed to in the final version, where you can time travel you just have to do one dungeon, and then you can time travel as much as you want, really.
It's kind of funny because it's like they gave you an in-story reason of why you can't immediately travel back in time, but in the final version, it's just Sheik standing there.
She's just standing in the way.
So it's like, we did have a real reason why you couldn't do it, but now we're just going to put her there.
That would explain. I've always wondered why the spiritual stones were like grayscale in certain shots.
Yeah, in just a couple screenshots.
Yeah.
And it's it talks about, there's text where it's like, oh, the stone's stuck there, but it's lost its shine, and then the door won't open. Is what like the door of time won't open now. And then so I mean, I don't know if it's at the temples that you'd have to do it, but at some point you have. That just makes the most sense to me from what I. But I think closing the door just makes way more sense than having Sheik just stand there in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Like they're one-time use. You have to, unless you can recharge. Yeah.
One and done.
Yeah.
All right. So again, I could go on for hours talking about this stuff. There's a lot more that you can see in some of Tony's videos on Hard for Games, and there's 2 videos so far from us, and Daniel is working on a third going more in depth on a bunch of the tech stuff that we mentioned, plus a bunch of other stuff that we haven't had time for. And Tony, I apologize for keeping you past your allotted time, but thank you for staying with us for a full hour.
How dare you?
we somehow got up to 82 people watching us talk about a game.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Talking about a game that didn't happen.
I'm always long-winded with you guys, so I know I'm just going to end up chit-chatting away. So I could say that I have about 40 minutes, and then I know it'll really be an hour, so it's
because you get stuck on those tangents with the conversations, and you get
that's the way it goes, man. You start talking about Zelda, and it starts flowing. You know, I mean, it's a good opportunity to nerd out. But I appreciate you guys having me on and letting me chit-chat about this crazy stuff and talk about these crazy mods people are doing with them. And like I said, definitely check out Z64Me, and also keep an eye on Zell. He's working on some stuff that'll be out a little bit later. That'll be pretty interesting.
All right, and you have for the people that are tuning in towards the end of this, what kind of stuff can they find on your channel if they want to see more of you, and where could they follow you on Twitter or support you on Patreon, all that fun stuff?
So I'm from Hard for Games. It's hard #4 games, and yes, you heard that right. Unfortunately, that's what we named our channel. But we do a lot of preservation work, a lot of gaming archaeology. Do our best to be involved in the community, and people will send us cartridges and discs and development stuff to preserve and just make sure that it survives, basically. And then we'll cover a lot of that on the channel as well. So and of course, everything is pretty much gaming or media related. So if you're into that type of stuff, if you like what we talked about here today, there's a lot of that type of content over on my channel. So you can search Hard for Games on YouTube, or we're on Twitter, Hard for Games. Pretty much all social media outlets, it's Hard for Games. So
one of my favorite videos that everyone can go and check out is not too long ago you uploaded a promotional video from Blockbuster of Zelda 64 that had some
Brazilian one,
what we thought was never before seen footage, because we'd seen screenshots from the video, but we'd never actually seen the video unless you were lucky enough to be in that country and walk into a GameStop. But one really cool thing that I noticed in it earlier when I watched it was the original way that you would get the magic power. In Ocarina of Time's final version, you get it from the goddess on top of Death Mountain, if I remember correctly. But in this, it's that blue goddess, the great fairy goddess, or whatever nickname people gave her, because we've seen screenshots of her, and some people were like, oh, she gives you the Triforce, or blah, 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 or whatever people thought of. But in this, you can clearly see she restores your hearts, and then a magic bar pops up, but the magic bar is red instead of green. So that's interesting.
There was some good footage in there. So a lot of what we do too is like gaming related media preservation. So like VHS tapes that maybe you've never seen. Nintendo used to have a lot of kiosks that used Laserdisc technology. So we have some of the Laserdiscs that we've preserved and gotten the footage off of, like really nice quality and cleaned up, and then kind of put out there for everybody to see. So that's the sort of weird stuff that we're interested in.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Go watch some of Tony's stuff on Hard for Games. There's the videos that I recommended, which is in line with the beta Zelda 64 stuff that were discussed throughout this. And Daniel has some cool Zelda videos on his own channel you can go check out. And thank you all for watching.